She's just a grocery store cashier, my mother-in-law Patricia laughed, her voice dripping with disdain as she gestured toward me while I served coffee to the family gathering. Honestly, Marcus, I don't understand why you settled for someone who can't even afford decent clothes. The entire Thompson family erupted in cruel laughter while I stood there in my Target dress, feeling smaller by the second. But what they didn't know was that their monthly rent checks for the luxury apartment building they called home, they were all made out to me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The annual Thompson family reunion was supposed to be a celebration, but for me, it had become an endurance test of subtle insults and not-so-subtle reminders that I didn't belong. 23 family members had gathered at the community center in Riverside Heights, the upscale neighborhood where most of Marcus's relatives lived, and I was the only one who didn't fit their idea of success. I'd arrived that Saturday morning wearing my best dress, a navy blue number from Target that had cost me $40 and made me feel confident when I bought it. But standing in that room full of designer outfits and expensive jewelry, I felt like I was wearing a costume that fooled no one. Marcus's Aunt Helen had already made a comment about my cute little outfit, with the kind of smile that wasn't meant to be kind. The trouble started when Marcus's cousin David asked what I did for work. It was an innocent enough question, the kind of small talk that happens at family gatherings, but I could feel the attention of the room shifting toward me like a spotlight I didn't want. I work at Morrison's Market, I said simply, referring to the upscale grocery store where I'd been employed for the past 3 years. I'm in customer service. The silence that followed was brief but telling. I could practically see the family members exchanging glances, filing away this information about Marcus's wife, who worked at a grocery store. Not owned a grocery store chain, not managed multiple locations, just worked at one. Customer service, repeated Marcus's brother Jake with a smirk. That's a nice way of saying cashier, right? I felt heat rising in my cheeks, but before I could respond, Marcus jumped in with what he probably thought was helpful clarification. Emma works part-time, he said, his hand finding my shoulder in what looked like a supportive gesture but felt like he was steadying something that might topple over. It keeps her busy and gives her some spending money. Spending money. As if my job was a hobby, a way to pass time rather than a deliberate choice. I opened my mouth to correct him, to explain that I worked 35 hours a week and had been promoted twice in 3 years. But Patricia Thompson chose that moment to deliver her devastating assessment. She's just a grocery store cashier, she announced to the room, as if this explained everything that was wrong with her son's choice in wives. Honestly, Marcus, I don't understand why you settled for someone who can't even afford decent clothes. The laughter that followed felt like ice water in my veins. Not gentle chuckling or polite amusement, but genuine hilarity at my expense. Jake slapped his knee like Patricia had delivered the punchline of the century. Helen wiped tears from her eyes. Even some of the younger cousins were giggling behind their hands. I stood there holding a coffee pot frozen between the kitchen and the main room, watching my husband's family find my existence genuinely amusing. Marcus didn't laugh, but he didn't defend me either. He just stood there with that uncomfortable smile people wear when they're embarrassed by association. I mean, look at her, Patricia continued, clearly emboldened by the reaction she was getting. That dress probably came from Walmart. Those shoes are definitely Payless. And don't get me started on that purse. My purse was actually from Coach, but it was 3 years old and I'd bought it secondhand, so I suppose Patricia's designer-trained eye could detect its lack of newness. Everything about me, apparently, screamed discount store and financial struggle. Now, Patricia, said Uncle Robert, Marcus's father's brother, though his tone suggested he was enjoying the show. Not everyone can afford to shop where you do. It's not about affording it, Patricia shot back. It's about priorities. It's about understanding that how you present yourself matters. When you marry into a family like ours, there are expectations. Expectations. I'd been hearing about the Thompson family expectations for 2 years of marriage, but this was the first time someone had spelled out so clearly that I was failing to meet them. The Thompsons owned a successful chain of auto dealerships throughout the state. Marcus worked as a sales manager at the flagship location, a job that came with a comfortable salary and the kind of respect that his family valued. But apparently my job scanning barcodes and asking, paper or plastic, didn't command the same level of respect. I just think Marcus could have done better, Patricia continued, and I realized she was no longer talking to the room. She was talking about me as if I weren't standing right there. Someone with education, with ambition, someone who understands what it means to be part of a family business. The family business. That was always the underlying current in these conversations. The Thompson family had built something together, multiple generations working toward shared success. Marcus's grandfather had started with one used car lot. His father had expanded to 5 locations. Marcus and his cousins were being groomed to take over and expand even further. And then there was me, the grocery store cashier, who contributed nothing to the Thompson legacy except the occasional embarrassment at family gatherings. Emma's a hard worker, Marcus said finally, though his defense felt half-hearted. She's been promoted twice at Morrison's. Promoted? Scoffed Jake. From cashier to what, head cashier? More laughter. I could feel my face burning with humiliation, but something else was building underneath. A familiar anger that I'd learned to suppress in situations like this. The anger of someone who was tired of being underestimated, dismissed, reduced to assumptions based on appearance and occupation. Actually, I said, my voice cutting through the laughter with a clarity that surprised even me. I'm the evening shift supervisor. I manage 12 employees and handle all the customer service escalations. The room quieted slightly, though I could see Patricia rolling her eyes at what she clearly viewed as my pathetic attempt to make my job sound important. That's wonderful, dear, she said with the kind of patronizing sweetness that's worse than outright insult. I'm sure that's very fulfilling for you. Fulfilling. The word dripped with condescension, the implication being that someone like me should be grateful for whatever small bit of authority I could scrape together in the retail world. Marcus's cousin Sarah, who worked as a marketing coordinator at one of the dealerships, decided to join the conversation. I think it's great that Emma has a job, she said with false enthusiasm. Not everyone needs a career, right? Some people are just happy with simple work. Simple work. As if customer service, dealing with angry customers, managing inventory issues, training new employees, handling cash discrepancies and scheduling conflicts, was somehow less complex than selling cars to people who already wanted to buy them. I looked around the room at these people who had known me for 2 years but had never bothered to learn anything about me beyond my job title. They saw me as Marcus's poor choice, the girl who dragged down the family average, the one who would never understand their world of business success and financial achievement. What they didn't know was that I understood their world better than they could imagine. What they didn't know was that their monthly rent payments, the ones that allowed them to live in their beautiful apartments in Riverside Heights, were deposited into accounts that bore my name. What they didn't know was that the building where Patricia Thompson lived in her luxury 2-bedroom apartment, the one she was so proud of with its granite countertops and hardwood floors, belonged to me. But as I stood there in my Target dress holding a coffee pot and absorbing their mockery, I realized they didn't need to know. Not yet. Let them think I was just a grocery store cashier who couldn't afford decent clothes. Let them believe I was the family embarrassment, the one who brought nothing to the Thompson legacy. Because what they were about to discover was that sometimes the person you underestimate the most is the one who controls more than you ever imagined. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The drive home from the Thompson family reunion was conducted in tense silence. Marcus gripped the steering wheel of his Ford F-150, occasionally glancing at me with the expression of someone who knew a difficult conversation was coming, but hoped it might magically disappear if he ignored it long enough. I stared out the passenger window at the familiar neighborhoods of our city, watching the houses grow smaller and less expensive as we moved away from Riverside Heights toward our modest duplex in Maplewood. The contrast wasn't lost on me. We were literally driving down the economic ladder, away from the world Marcus's family inhabited, and toward the life they assumed was all I could aspire to. My mom didn't mean anything by it, Marcus finally said as we stopped at a red light about 5 minutes from our house. His voice carried that careful tone he used when he was trying to manage a situation rather than actually address it. I turned to look at him, this man I'd been married to for 2 years, wondering when he'd learned to speak in corporate damage control phrases. She called me a grocery store cashier who can't afford decent clothes and said you settled for me. What exactly did she mean by it? You know how she is, he replied, accelerating as the light turned green. She's protective of the family. She just wants to make sure everyone fits in. Fits in. Another phrase that meant everything and nothing. A diplomatic way of saying I wasn't good enough without actually having to defend that position. And you? I asked. Do you think I fit in? The pause that followed was answer enough, but Marcus tried to fill it with more careful words. I think you're perfect the way you are, Em. But you have to understand, my family has certain expectations. There was that word again. Expectations. As if the Thompson family was some kind of royal dynasty, with protocols that must be observed, rather than 3 generations of people who'd gotten lucky in the used car business. What kind of expectations? I pressed. Marcus pulled into our driveway and turned off the engine, but he didn't immediately get out of the truck. Instead, he sat there for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. Look, the family business is expanding, he said finally. Dad's looking at opening 2 more locations next year, maybe 3. Jake and David are both being considered for management positions. Even Sarah's getting more involved with the marketing side. I waited for him to explain what this had to do with me, though I was beginning to suspect I knew where this conversation was heading. The thing is, Marcus continued, when you're building something like this, appearance matters. Client perception matters. The wives and families of the management team, they represent the company too. Wives and families, as if I were an extension of Marcus rather than a person in my own right, as if my primary function was to enhance his professional image rather than live my own life. So, what are you saying exactly, I asked, though I was pretty sure I already knew. I'm saying maybe it's time to think about upgrading. Your job, your wardrobe, the car you drive. Not because there's anything wrong with what you have, he added quickly, but because we're at a place where we need to start thinking bigger. Upgrading. Like I was a piece of outdated software that needed to be replaced with a newer version. Marcus, I said slowly, are you asking me to quit my job? I'm asking you to consider whether working at Morrison's is really the best use of your time, he replied. You're smart. You're capable. You could do something more, professional. Maybe get your real estate license. Work with Sarah on the marketing team. Something that would complement what I'm doing with the dealerships. Something that would complement what he was doing. Not something that would fulfill me or challenge me or allow me to build something of my own, but something that would make me a better supporting player in his career trajectory. What if I like my job? I asked. Marcus looked genuinely puzzled by the question, as if the idea that someone might actually enjoy customer service work was foreign to him. But Emma, it's not really a career, is it? It's just a job. Don't you want something more? The question hung between us, loaded with assumptions about what more meant and who got to define it. In Marcus's world, more meant climbing a corporate ladder, earning a bigger salary, acquiring status symbols that other people would recognize and respect. The idea that someone might find satisfaction in work that didn't come with a corner office or a business card apparently didn't compute. Inside our duplex, I went through my usual evening routine while Marcus turned on a football game. But my mind was elsewhere. I found myself thinking about the conversation in the truck, about the expectations I was supposed to meet, about the woman Marcus apparently wanted me to become. But mostly I was thinking about the things Marcus didn't know about me. The things his family couldn't see past their assumptions about grocery store workers and Target dresses. I pulled out my laptop and opened the folder I kept hidden in a subdirectory labeled Emma's Files. Innocuous enough that Marcus had never bothered to look inside. What he would have found there might have changed his perspective on my simple job and lack of ambition. The first document was a business registration form filed 3 years ago, 6 months before Marcus and I had even met. Riverside Property Management LLC, it read, with my name listed as the sole owner and operator. Not Emma Thompson, the name I'd taken when we married, but Emma Chen, my maiden name that still appeared on all my business documents. The second document was a bank statement, showing the current balance in my business account. $847,000. Not bad for someone who supposedly couldn't afford decent clothes. The third document was a property deed for the Riverside Heights apartment complex, purchased 2 years ago for $3.2 million. The same complex where Patricia Thompson paid $2,800 a month for her luxury 2-bedroom apartment. The same complex where Jake and his wife rented a one-bedroom for $2,200. The same complex where Uncle Robert and Aunt Helen had their corner unit that overlooked the city. 7 units in total, all occupied by members of Marcus's family, all generating rental income that funded my very comfortable lifestyle. They just didn't know it, because they'd never bothered to learn my maiden name or ask any questions about my background beyond what they could observe at family gatherings. I scrolled through the rent payment records, noting that Patricia was consistently 3 days late with her payment and always complained about something: the hallway lighting, the noise from upstairs, the speed of the elevator. Jake's wife had left increasingly demanding voicemails about wanting a dishwasher upgrade. Uncle Robert had requested permission to install a hot tub on his balcony, apparently not realizing that such modifications required approval from the property owner. The property owner who served them coffee at family reunions while they mocked her financial situation. I opened another folder, this one containing documentation for my other investments. The small office building downtown that housed 3 businesses and generated $8,000 in monthly rent. The duplex we actually lived in, which I owned outright but had never mentioned to Marcus because he'd been so proud of finding it and negotiating what he thought was a good lease agreement with the landlord. Marcus thought we were renting our home for $1,400 a month. In reality, I was depositing his rent check into my personal account each month, along with the money I supposedly contributed from my grocery store paychecks. It was an elaborate financial shell game that allowed him to feel like the primary breadwinner while actually being subsidized by the woman his family looked down on. The most recent addition to my portfolio was a strip mall on the outskirts of town, purchased 6 months ago when the previous owner needed a quick sale. Nothing glamorous, but the auto parts store, convenience market, and sandwich shop that rented space there provided steady income and required minimal management. In total, my real estate investments generated approximately $22,000 per month in rental income. My minimum wage job at Morrison's Market brought in another $1,800 monthly, money I actually enjoyed earning because I genuinely liked the work and the people I worked with. But the real irony was that Marcus's family, who looked down on my grocery store job as evidence of my lack of ambition, were essentially funding my investment portfolio with their rent payments. Every month, Patricia's $2,800 went toward maintaining and expanding my real estate holdings. Jake's $2,200 helped fund my next property acquisition. Uncle Robert's $3,100 for his corner unit contributed to a business empire they couldn't even imagine. I'd started investing in real estate during college, using money I'd saved from working multiple jobs, and a small inheritance from my grandmother. What began as a single rental property had grown into a portfolio worth over $8 million, all managed under my business name, all invisible to people who saw only a grocery store worker in discount clothes. The question now was what to do with this information. I could continue letting Marcus and his family underestimate me, continue playing the role of this simple-minded cashier who didn't understand their world of business success. Or I could find a way to educate them about exactly who they were dealing with. Marcus appeared in the doorway of our home office, beer in hand, still riding the confidence high from whatever his family had decided about my future during the car ride home. "Hey, Em," he said, leaning against the doorframe. "I was thinking about what we talked about earlier. Maybe this is actually good timing. Sarah mentioned they might have an opening in the marketing department, something entry-level that would get you started in a real career. A real career, as opposed to the fake career I'd apparently been pursuing for the past several years." "That's thoughtful of Sarah," I replied, closing my laptop without letting him see what I'd been working on. "What kind of position?" "Administrative assistant to start, probably. Answering phones, filing, basic computer stuff. But it would get your foot in the door, and Sarah says they're really good about promoting from within." An administrative assistant position, answering phones and filing, offered to me by people who had no idea I could buy their entire business with my current liquid assets. "The salary would be about what you make now," Marcus continued, "but the benefits are better, and there's real growth potential. Plus you'd be working with family, which has to be better than dealing with grocery store customers all day." I smiled at him, the same pleasant smile I'd been giving his family for 2 years. "It sounds like you've given this a lot of thought." "I just want what's best for you," he said, and I could tell he genuinely believed that. In his mind, rescuing me from my dead-end retail job and placing me in an entry-level position at his family's business was an act of love and generosity. He had no idea that what was best for me was something I'd already built for myself, something that existed completely outside his family's sphere of influence and understanding. "Let me think about it," I said. That night, as Marcus slept beside me, I lay awake planning my next move. The Thompson family had made their position clear. I was an embarrassment, a burden, someone who needed to be managed and improved, and possibly replaced with someone more suitable. But they'd made a crucial mistake in their assessment. They'd assumed that someone who worked in customer service and shopped at Target must be struggling financially, must be dependent on Marcus, and grateful for whatever opportunities his family might offer. They'd never considered the possibility that the person they were mocking might be the one person in the room who could actually afford to buy the business they were so proud of. Tomorrow, I decided, I would start giving them the education they so desperately needed. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that made everything feel like a fresh start. I woke up before my alarm, energized by a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in months. While Marcus showered and prepared for another day of selling cars to people who already knew they wanted them, I was planning something much more interesting. My shift at Morrison's Market didn't start until noon, which gave me the entire morning to begin what I was already thinking of as my fact-finding mission. The Thompson family had made their opinions about my life abundantly clear, but I was curious about the details of theirs, specifically their financial details. I started with public records, something any property owner learns to navigate efficiently. The county assessor's website revealed fascinating information about the Thompson family's real estate holdings, or more accurately, their lack thereof. Marcus's parents, William and Patricia Thompson, owned their house in Riverside Heights outright, a modest 3-bedroom ranch worth approximately $340,000. Not poor by any means, but hardly the real estate empire I'd expected from people who spoke with such authority about property values and investment strategies. Jake Thompson, the brother who'd found my job so amusing, rented his apartment in my building and owned nothing but a 2019 Chevy Camaro, with 48 more payments due. His wife Jessica had a 2020 Honda CR-V that was also financed. For people who worked in car sales, they seemed to have embraced the monthly payment lifestyle rather than actually building wealth. Uncle Robert and Aunt Helen's financial picture was even more interesting. They'd owned a house in Riverside Heights until 2 years ago, when they'd sold it and moved into their rental apartment. The public records showed the sale price, $285,000, which meant they'd likely walked away with about $150,000 after paying off their mortgage and closing costs. That $150,000 should have been enough for a comfortable retirement supplement, but here they were paying $3,100 a month in rent to live in my building. Either they'd made some spectacular financial miscalculations, or that money had been invested in something that wasn't generating enough return to cover housing costs. I pulled up the business registration records for Thompson Auto Group, curious about the family empire that supposedly justified their attitude toward my career choices. What I found was illuminating. Tight or free, the business was indeed successful, but not nearly as impressive as the family liked to present. 5 dealership locations with total annual revenue of approximately $18 million, which sounded substantial until you factored in the overhead, inventory costs, and the fact that profit margins in auto sales are notoriously thin. More interesting was the ownership structure. William Thompson owned 51% of the business, but the remaining 49% was held by something called Riverside Investment Partners, a commercial lending company that specialized in financing automotive dealerships. In other words, the Thompson family business was heavily leveraged, dependent on outside investors who held nearly half the company. The individual salary information wasn't public, but I could make educated guesses based on industry standards. Marcus, as a sales manager, probably earned around $65,000 annually plus commissions. Jake, as a senior salesperson, likely made $50,000 plus commissions. Decent middle-class incomes, but hardly the kind of money that justified looking down on other people's career choices. My phone rang while I was deep in financial research. The caller ID showed Morrison's Market, and I recognized the voice of Amanda Rodriguez, the store's general manager. Emma, I hate to call on your day off, Amanda said, but we just got word that corporate is sending someone down this week for the quarterly review. They specifically asked to meet with you about the customer satisfaction improvements we've implemented. I smiled, remembering the system I'd developed 6 months ago for tracking and resolving customer complaints. What had started as a simple spreadsheet had evolved into a comprehensive customer service protocol that had reduced complaints by 40% and increased customer retention significantly. Of course, I said. What day works best? Thursday afternoon if you can make it. And Emma, they mentioned this could lead to a district supervisor position if you're interested. It would mean overseeing customer service operations at 4 stores, substantial salary increase, management training program. A district supervisor position. Real career advancement in an industry I actually enjoyed, with people who valued my contributions and understood my capabilities. The irony wasn't lost on me that this opportunity was materializing just as Marcus's family was pressuring me to abandon my dead-end job for an entry-level position answering their phones. I'm very interested, I told Amanda. Send me the details and I'll be ready. After hanging up, I found myself thinking about the different ways success could be measured. The Thompson family measured it in car sales, business ownership, and the kind of visible prosperity that impressed other people. They saw success as something you displayed, the right clothes, the right job title, the right social connections. But what if success was something quieter? What if it was the financial freedom to choose your own path? The security of passive income that didn't depend on monthly sales quotas? The satisfaction of building something sustainable rather than flashy? I opened my business banking app and reviewed my rental income for the month. 7 apartment units in Riverside Heights, each generating steady monthly payments from tenants, who had no idea their landlord was the woman they'd mocked at yesterday's family gathering. The strip mall on Oakwood Drive was fully occupied, with lease agreements that included annual rent increases tied to inflation. The downtown office building had a waiting list of businesses wanting to rent space. None of this was visible to people who judged success by appearance and job titles. None of it showed up in casual conversation or family gatherings. But it represented a level of financial independence that most people could only dream of achieving. My laptop chimed with an email notification. The sender was Riverside Property Management, which was actually just me corresponding with myself from different email addresses, but it looked official enough to fool anyone who might accidentally see it. The email contained maintenance requests from tenants in my apartment building. Patricia Thompson wanted the hallway carpets cleaned, Jake's wife was requesting a new garbage disposal, and Uncle Robert was complaining about the noise level from the apartment above his. I made notes to contact the appropriate service providers, then paused to appreciate the delicious irony of the situation. These people who viewed me as beneath their social class were essentially my employees, generating income that funded my continued investment in real estate. Every month, they dutifully paid their rent to the property management company, never suspecting that the grocery store cashier they looked down on was the one approving their maintenance requests and deciding whether their lease would be renewed. The maintenance requests gave me an idea. Instead of handling everything through my usual contractors, what if I took a more hands-on approach? What if the next time Patricia complained about something, she got a visit from the property owner herself? I spent the next hour researching property management techniques, specifically how landlords could legally inspect their properties and interact with tenants. Most property management companies preferred to keep owners and tenants separated to avoid conflicts. But there was nothing preventing an owner from being directly involved in property maintenance and tenant relations. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Had lunch with Dad today. He's excited about you potentially joining the team. Sarah says she can set up an interview this week. An interview for an entry-level administrative position, with people who had no idea I could afford to buy their entire business without touching my primary investment accounts. I texted back, "That's thoughtful. I actually have some career developments happening at Morrison's too. Might be getting promoted to district supervisor." The response came quickly. "That's great, honey, but we should probably focus on the family business opportunity. More potential for growth. More potential for growth." in a heavily leveraged auto dealership owned by people who couldn't afford to buy the apartments they lived in, versus a district management position in a billion-dollar grocery chain that was expanding throughout the region. I looked around our duplex, taking inventory of the life Marcus thought we were building together. The furniture we'd bought on payment plans because he'd insisted we needed to establish credit. The lease he was so proud of negotiating, not knowing he was essentially paying rent to his own wife. The careful budgeting he did each month, dividing expenses between his salary and my supposed grocery store earnings, unaware that my actual income was nearly double what he brought home from the dealership. Our entire financial life was built on his assumptions about my earning capacity and career potential. He managed our money based on the belief that I made $1,800 a month scanning barcodes and dealing with difficult customers, never suspecting that I was actually earning $23,800 monthly from real estate investments and genuinely enjoyed my work at Morrison's. But what happened when those assumptions were challenged? What happened when the Thompson family discovered that their foundational beliefs about me were completely wrong? I was about to find out. My first stop was the Riverside Heights apartment complex, where I'd decided to begin taking a more active role in property management. I parked my Honda Civic, a practical choice that reinforced everyone's assumptions about my financial situation, in the visitors' parking area, and walked through the lobby like any other tenant or guest. The building was beautiful, and I felt a surge of pride knowing I'd created this living environment for people, even if they didn't appreciate either the space or the person who provided it. The lobby featured marble floors, contemporary furniture, and large windows that filled the space with natural light. The hallways were carpeted in neutral tones, with modern lighting fixtures and artwork that created an upscale residential atmosphere. I took the elevator to the third floor, where Patricia Thompson lived in Unit 3B. According to her most recent complaint email, the hallway carpets were completely unacceptable and needed immediate replacement. I wanted to see exactly what Patricia Thompson considered unacceptable in housing that cost $2,800 per month. The carpets looked fine to me, professionally cleaned every 6 months, neutral beige color that hadn't shown significant wear. But Patricia Thompson had never been someone who hesitated to complain about things that didn't meet her standards, whether it was her daughter-in-law's wardrobe or her apartment building's maintenance. I made a note to schedule a carpet inspection, not because the carpets needed replacing, but because I was curious to see how Patricia would react to dealing directly with property management representatives. Would she be as demanding and condescending with someone she perceived as a service provider as she was with family members she viewed as beneath her social status? Unit 2A belonged to Jake and Jessica Thompson, who had recently requested a garbage disposal upgrade. I made a note to schedule that maintenance visit as well. Jake, who had found my employment status so hilarious yesterday, would soon be dealing with contractors and property management representatives who would be reporting directly back to me. Uncle Robert and Aunt Helen lived in the corner unit on the 4th floor, the premium apartment with city views that justified the $3,100 monthly rent. Robert's complaint about noise from upstairs was interesting, since there was no upstairs. Their unit was on the top floor. Either Robert was confused about the source of the noise, or he was manufacturing complaints to justify requesting a rent reduction. Either way, it would be interesting to investigate. I spent another 30 minutes walking through the building, making notes about maintenance needs and improvement opportunities. This wasn't just my investment property anymore. It was becoming my laboratory for understanding exactly how the Thompson family behaved when they thought no one important was watching. By the time I drove home to get ready for my afternoon shift at Morrison's, I had a plan forming. The Thompson family wanted to educate me about success, career advancement, and fitting into their social expectations. But education worked both ways, and I was about to teach them some lessons they would never forget. Wednesday morning brought the first opportunity to test my new strategy. I was reviewing tenant communications over coffee when an email arrived from Patricia Thompson that perfectly embodied everything I'd come to expect from my mother-in-law's approach to getting what she wanted. To whom it may concern, the email began, as if she were addressing a government agency rather than the property management company for her apartment building. I am writing to express my extreme dissatisfaction with the current state of this building's maintenance standards. The hallway carpeting on the 3rd floor is completely inadequate for a luxury residential property, and I demand immediate replacement with something more appropriate to the rent I'm paying." The email continued for 3 paragraphs detailing every perceived shortcoming in the building's upkeep, from the insufficient lobby lighting to the unacceptable speed of the elevator. She concluded with a thinly veiled threat about involving, quote, "my son's business associates who have connections in commercial real estate," if her concerns weren't addressed promptly. Her son's business associates. Patricia was threatening to use Marcus's professional connections to pressure the property management company, not knowing that the owner of the building was someone she'd spent years treating like hired help at family gatherings. I composed my response carefully, writing from my official Riverside Property Management email address. "Dear Ms. Thompson, thank you for bringing your concerns to our attention. We take all tenant feedback seriously and want to ensure you're completely satisfied with your living experience at Riverside Heights. I'd like to schedule a personal meeting to discuss your concerns in detail and conduct a thorough inspection of the issues you've mentioned. As the property owner, I prefer to handle situations like this directly rather than delegating to staff members who might not fully understand the importance of maintaining our high standards. Would Friday morning at 10 a.m. work for your schedule? I can meet you in your apartment to review the specific areas you've mentioned and discuss immediate solutions. Best regards, E. Chen, owner, Riverside Heights Apartments." I read the email twice before sending it, savoring the moment. Patricia Thompson, who had never bothered to learn my maiden name despite 2 years of family gatherings, was about to discover that the grocery store cashier she looked down on was actually her landlord. The response arrived within an hour. "Mr. Chen, I'm pleased to see that ownership is taking my concerns seriously. Friday at 10 a.m. will be acceptable. I'll prepare a comprehensive list of additional issues that require attention. I should mention that my family has significant influence in this city's business community, so I trust we'll be able to resolve these matters satisfactorily. Patricia Thompson, Unit 3B. Mr. Chen." Patricia had assumed that anyone successful enough to own a luxury apartment building must be male. The assumption was both predictable and revealing. In her worldview, women like me might work in grocery stores or answer phones, but we didn't own commercial real estate worth millions of dollars. I forwarded the email exchange to my phone and headed to Morrison's for my afternoon shift, wondering how Patricia would react when Mr. Chen turned out to be someone she already knew. At Morrison's, I found myself looking at my workplace through new eyes. The Thompson family saw grocery retail as somehow beneath serious consideration, but Morrison's Market was actually a sophisticated operation. The store employed 42 people, generated over $3 million in annual revenue, and served as an anchor tenant for the shopping center that housed 12 other businesses. My role as evening shift supervisor meant I was responsible for operations from 2 p.m. until closing, managing everything from inventory control to customer service escalations to employee scheduling. The district supervisor position Amanda had mentioned would expand that responsibility across 4 locations, overseeing operations that probably generated more revenue than the Thompson family's entire auto dealership business. Emma called Jessica Martinez one of the newer cashiers. "I've got a customer here who's claiming we overcharged her, but the receipt clearly shows the correct amount. She's asking for a manager." I walked over to Register 3, where an elderly woman was holding a receipt and looking frustrated. These situations were exactly why I enjoyed customer service work. Every problem was a puzzle to be solved, and most people just wanted to feel heard and understood. "Hi, I'm Emma, the shift supervisor," I said with a genuine smile. "I understand there's some confusion about your receipt." 20 minutes later, I discovered that the customer had been charged correctly, but the sale price stickers on the shelf hadn't been updated to reflect a promotion that had ended the previous week. Rather than arguing about store policy, I honored the price she'd expected to pay and made a note to have the shelf tags updated immediately. "You see," I explained to Jessica afterward, "customer satisfaction isn't about being right or wrong. It's about people feeling respected and valued. That woman will tell 5 friends about the great service she received here, and they'll all become regular customers." Jessica nodded, taking notes. "That makes sense. I was so focused on following the rules that I forgot about making the customer happy." These were the conversations that reminded me why I genuinely enjoyed my work at Morrison's. I was teaching people skills they could use throughout their careers, solving problems that made a real difference in people's daily lives, and contributing to a business model that served the community effectively. But according to the Thompson family, this was just simple work that anyone could do. Employment that demonstrated my lack of ambition and understanding of how real business operated. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Sarah set up the interview for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Dad's really excited about bringing you into the family business. I looked at the message while watching Jessica help her next customer, applying the techniques we'd just discussed. Tomorrow at 2 p.m., I would be sitting in some office at Thompson Auto Group, being interviewed for an entry-level administrative position by people who had no idea what I actually did for a living. The same day that I would be meeting with Patricia Thompson as the owner of her apartment building. I texted back, "Sounds good. I have a property management meeting in the morning, but I should be free by 2. Property management meeting. Technically accurate, though Marcus would probably assume I was talking about something related to our duplex lease rather than my own real estate portfolio. The rest of my shift passed quickly, filled with the usual mix of customer service issues, employee questions, and operational tasks that kept the store running smoothly. Around 6 p.m., Amanda Rodriguez stopped by my section to discuss the corporate visit scheduled for Thursday. "I've been reviewing your customer satisfaction reports," she said, pulling up data on her tablet. "The improvements you've implemented have been incredible. Complaint resolution time is down 35%, customer retention is up 18%, and employee satisfaction scores in your section are the highest in the district." I felt a familiar surge of pride in work well done. These weren't just numbers. They represented real improvements in people's experiences, both customers and employees. "The district supervisor position would be a significant step up," Amanda continued. 4 stores, management training program, salary range starting at $78,000, plus performance bonuses. Are you interested in learning more? $78,000, plus bonuses, to do work I genuinely enjoyed in an industry that valued my contributions. Meanwhile, the Thompson family was offering me an entry-level position, answering phones for what would probably be $35,000 annually, as if they were doing me an enormous favor. "Definitely interested," I told Amanda. "Send me whatever information you have." That evening, I spent 2 hours preparing for both of my Friday meetings. For the interview at Thompson Auto Group, I selected a conservative outfit that would meet their expectations for how an entry-level administrative candidate should dress: a simple gray dress from Nordstrom Rack, low heels, minimal jewelry. The kind of outfit that would reinforce their assumptions about my financial situation while appearing appropriately professional for the position they were offering. For my meeting with Patricia Thompson, I chose something entirely different. A tailored black pantsuit from Brooks Brothers that I'd bought for real estate closing meetings, paired with Italian leather shoes, and a briefcase that had cost more than most people's monthly rent. The outfit of someone who owned millions of dollars in commercial property and wasn't inclined to tolerate difficult tenants. I laid both outfits on the bed, side by side, marveling at the contrast. In a few hours, I would be playing 2 completely different roles for the same family: the grateful job applicant seeking entry-level employment, and the property owner dealing with a demanding tenant. The irony was perfect, but there was something else building underneath my amusement. Anger, maybe? Or justice, or simply the satisfaction of knowing that people who had underestimated me for so long were about to discover exactly how wrong they'd been. Marcus came home from work around 8 p.m., full of enthusiasm about my upcoming interview. "Dad pulled me aside today," he said, loosening his tie as he settled onto our couch. "He's really impressed that you're willing to make this career change. He thinks you have potential, you just need the right environment to develop it." Potential that needed development. As if my current work environment was somehow holding me back from achieving my true capabilities, rather than providing a platform where I'd already demonstrated leadership, problem-solving skills, and business acumen. "That's nice of him to say," I replied neutrally. "Sarah's excited too. She thinks having you on the team would be great for family dynamics, give you a better understanding of what we're all working toward." What they were all working toward. A leveraged auto dealership business that generated decent middle-class incomes, while requiring them to rent apartments from people they didn't even recognize as successful. "I'm looking forward to learning more about the opportunity," I said, which was true, though probably not in the way Marcus imagined. Some maintenance worker. The casual dismissal reminded me exactly why this meeting was necessary. I prefer to handle tenant concerns directly, I replied, opening my briefcase and removing a folder. Especially when they come from tenants who believe they have special influence in the local business community. Patricia smiled, apparently pleased that her implied threats had been taken seriously. Well, my family does have significant connections. My husband owns Thompson Auto Group, and my sons are both in management positions there. We understand how business relationships work in this city. I nodded thoughtfully, making notes on a legal pad. Thompson Auto Group, the dealership chain with locations on Elm Street, Oak Avenue, and the new facility on Riverside Drive? You know it. Patricia looked pleased and slightly surprised. I'm familiar with most of the major businesses in the area, I said. Real estate ownership requires understanding the local economic landscape. Patricia launched into a detailed explanation of her family's business success, their influence in the community, and her expectations for how a property owner should respond to tenant concerns. I listened carefully, taking notes, letting her believe that she was educating me about the importance of maintaining good relationships with well-connected tenants. Now, Patricia said finally, about these maintenance issues. The hallway carpeting is completely unacceptable for a building of this caliber. I've been paying premium rent for 2 years, and I expect premium accommodations. I looked up from my notes, meeting her eyes directly. Patricia, may I call you Patricia? Mrs. Thompson would be more appropriate, she replied stiffly. Of course, Mrs. Thompson, I've reviewed your lease agreement and your payment history very carefully. I pulled out the relevant documents, spreading them on her coffee table. According to my records, your monthly rent is $2,800, which you've paid an average of 4 days late for the past 18 months. Patricia's confident expression faltered slightly. Well, sometimes there are delays with automatic transfers. And you've submitted 17 formal complaints in the past year, I continued, consulting my notes. Everything from hallway lighting to elevator speed to neighbor noise levels. That's an average of more than 1 complaint per month. I have high standards, Patricia said defensively. When you're paying this much rent, you expect. You expect what exactly? I interrupted, my voice remaining professionally calm but taking on an edge that Patricia had never heard from me before. Because from where I sit, it looks like you expect preferential treatment based on threats about your family's business connections. The room fell silent. Patricia stared at me with growing confusion, clearly trying to understand why this meeting wasn't going the way she'd planned. I think there's been a misunderstanding, she said carefully. I'm not threatening anyone. I'm simply explaining that my family understands business relationships, and we expect professional service in return for premium rent payments. Premium rent payments, I repeated, pulling out another document. Mrs. Thompson, do you know what market rate would be for this apartment? Your 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom unit with city views and premium amenities. Current market rate for comparable units in this area is $3,400 per month. You've been paying $600 below market rate for 2 years. Patricia's face went pale. That can't be right. We negotiated a fair market lease. You negotiated a below-market lease, I corrected, with a property owner who was apparently willing to subsidize your housing costs. But rental markets change, Mrs. Thompson. And so do property owners' patience levels with difficult tenants. I stood up, walking to the windows that overlooked the city. These carpets you find so unacceptable? They were installed 18 months ago at a cost of $12,000 for the entire floor. The elevator you complain about? We upgraded the system last year for $85,000. The lobby lighting that doesn't meet your standards? That's a $15,000 LED installation that reduces energy costs while providing better illumination. Patricia was staring at me now with something approaching panic. I don't understand. Who are you exactly? I turned back to face her, letting the moment stretch as she processed what was happening. My name is Emma Chen, I said clearly. I'm the owner of this building. I'm also the person you know as Emma Thompson, your son Marcus's wife. The silence that followed was absolute. Patricia's mouth opened and closed several times, but no sound emerged. She looked like someone trying to process information that didn't fit into any framework she understood. That's impossible, she whispered finally. Is it? I pulled out my phone and showed her the property deed, clearly displaying my name as the owner. I purchased this building 2 years ago for $3.2 million. Your family has been paying me approximately $8,400 per month in combined rent payments since then. Patricia shook her head frantically. You work at a grocery store. You can't afford, this building costs millions. I work at Morrison's Market because I enjoy customer service and I'm good at it, I said calmly. Not because I need the money. My real estate portfolio generates more income in a month than most people make in a year. I sat back down, opening my briefcase to reveal additional documents. Would you like to see the bank statements? The investment records? The other properties I own throughout the city? Patricia stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. But you dress like... You drive a... I dress practically and drive a reliable car because I prefer to invest my money in appreciating assets rather than depreciating status symbols, I explained. Something your family might want to consider, given that you're all paying rent to someone you assumed was financially struggling. The color drained from Patricia's face as the full implications hit her. Marcus doesn't know. Marcus doesn't know that I own this building, correct? He also doesn't know that the duplex we live in belongs to me, or that his monthly rent payments go directly into my personal account. He thinks we're both struggling financially, which has made it easier for your family to look down on my career choices. Patricia slumped back in her chair, looking like someone who'd just realized she'd been playing a game where all the rules had been different than she'd understood. The grocery store job, she said weakly, is a job I'm good at and enjoy. I was just offered a promotion to district supervisor, overseeing operations at 4 stores with a starting salary of $78,000 plus bonuses. But your family wants to rescue me from my dead-end career by offering me an entry-level administrative position at your auto dealership. I pulled out one final document, a lease renewal notice I'd prepared that morning. Mrs. Thompson, your lease expires at the end of this month. I'm prepared to offer you a renewal, but there will be some changes. Market rate for this unit is now $3,400 per month. Additionally, tenants with excessive complaint histories will be required to pay a $500 monthly administrative fee for additional property management services. Patricia stared at the document in horror. You can't do this. We've been good tenants. Have you? I consulted my notes again. Late payments, constant complaints, attempts to intimidate property management with threats about your family's business connections. That doesn't sound like good tenant behavior to me. But we're family, Patricia protested desperately. Are we? I asked. Because at last weekend's family reunion, you made it very clear that I wasn't really part of the Thompson family. You called me a grocery store cashier who couldn't afford decent clothes. You said Marcus had settled for someone beneath his social class. Patricia's face crumpled as she realized the full weight of her situation. The woman she'd been mocking as a financial burden was actually her landlord, with the power to make her housing significantly more expensive, or potentially terminate her lease entirely. Emma, she said, her voice suddenly pleading. I didn't mean. You have to understand. We didn't know. You didn't know because you never bothered to learn, I replied firmly. You made assumptions based on my job and my appearance, and you treated me accordingly. But your assumptions were wrong, Mrs. Thompson, spectacularly wrong. I stood up, placing the lease renewal documents on her coffee table. You have until Monday to decide whether you want to renew at the new terms. If not, I'll need 60 days' notice to vacate, as specified in your current lease agreement. Patricia stared at the papers with the expression of someone watching her world collapse. What about Marcus? Are you going to tell him? I paused at her door, considering the question. That depends entirely on whether your family's attitude toward me changes. I suggest you think very carefully about how you want to handle this situation going forward. I left Patricia Thompson sitting in her apartment, my apartment, staring at lease renewal terms that would cost her an additional $900 per month, finally understanding that the woman she'd spent 2 years dismissing as a grocery store cashier was actually the person who controlled whether she had a place to live. In 4 hours, I would be sitting in Thompson Auto Group's office, being interviewed for an entry-level position by people who had no idea that the woman they were considering for employment could afford to buy their entire business without financing. The education of the Thompson family was just beginning. After leaving Patricia in a state of complete shock, I had 3 hours to prepare for the most ironic job interview of my career. I drove home, changed into the conservative gray dress I'd selected for my role as the grateful applicant, and spent 30 minutes researching entry-level administrative salaries to ensure I could play my part convincingly. The contrast between my morning and afternoon personas was almost comical. 4 hours earlier, I'd been the authoritative property owner delivering uncomfortable truths to a difficult tenant. Now I was preparing to be the humble grocery store worker, grateful for any opportunity to improve my circumstances through the generosity of the Thompson family business. Thompson Auto Group's main dealership was an impressive facility on Elm Street, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing rows of gleaming vehicles and a showroom designed to project success and prosperity. I parked my Honda Civic between a Mercedes and a BMW, noting how my practical car reinforced every assumption the Thompson family had made about my financial status. Inside, the showroom hummed with activity. Salespeople in expensive suits moved between customers, their voices carrying the confident tone of people accustomed to closing deals. The walls were covered with awards and recognition plaques, photographs of the Thompson family at various business events, and motivational posters about achieving excellence through teamwork. "Emma," Marcus appeared from behind a display of luxury SUVs, his face lighting up with the kind of enthusiasm I hadn't seen from him in months. "You look perfect. Professional but not too flashy. Exactly what Dad was hoping for." Not too flashy. Because someone interviewing for an entry-level administrative position shouldn't appear to have access to expensive clothes or accessories that might suggest financial independence. "Sarah's waiting in the conference room," Marcus continued, guiding me through the showroom toward the offices in the back. "She's really excited about this opportunity." We all are. The conference room was a shrine to Thompson family business success, with photographs documenting 3 generations of auto sales achievements. William Thompson shaking hands with various politicians and business leaders. Jake and Marcus accepting sales awards. The entire family at the grand opening of their newest location. Pictures of prosperity built on monthly payment plans and financing agreements. Sarah Thompson Williams sat at the head of the polished conference table, looking like someone who'd been born to conduct job interviews. She was Marcus's cousin, 2 years older, with the kind of confident bearing that came from never having had to prove herself to anyone who mattered. "Emma!" Sarah stood to shake my hand, her smile professionally warm. "I'm so glad we could make this work. Please, sit down. Can I get you coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." I settled into the chair across from her, noting how the position forced me to sit with my back to the photographs of Thompson family success. A subtle psychological positioning that reminded interviewees of their place in the hierarchy. Sarah opened a folder containing what appeared to be a job description and salary information. "I have to say, when Marcus mentioned you might be interested in joining our team, I was thrilled. We've been looking for someone reliable for our administrative support position, and hiring family is always preferable when possible." Hiring family. As if offering me a job was an act of generosity, rather than a business decision based on qualifications and capabilities. "I really appreciate you considering me," I said, channeling the earnest gratitude of someone who genuinely needed this opportunity. "I know my background isn't traditional for office work." "Well, that's what I wanted to discuss," Sarah replied, consulting her notes. "Your experience in customer service is actually valuable. Our administrative support person handles a lot of phone interactions with customers, so your retail background could be an asset." My retail background. 3 years of managing evening shift operations, training employees, resolving customer complaints, and implementing efficiency improvements, reduced to retail background that might be useful for answering phones. The position is full-time, Monday through Friday, 8 a.m. to 5 p.m., Sarah continued. "You'd be supporting our sales team with appointment scheduling, customer follow-up calls, basic data entry, filing, that sort of thing. Nothing too complicated, but it requires someone detail-oriented and professional." "Nothing too complicated." I nodded enthusiastically, as if the prospect of scheduling appointments and making follow-up calls represented a significant career advancement from my current role overseeing 12 employees and managing customer service operations for a $3 million business. "The starting salary is $32,000 annually," Sarah said, watching my face carefully for my reaction. I know that might be less than you're used to from your grocery store job, but there's real growth potential here. After a year, if everything goes well, we could look at promoting you to a customer service coordinator role, which would bump you up to maybe $38,000. $32,000. Less than I made in rental income from a single month, offered as if it were a generous opportunity for someone in my circumstances. I forced myself to look appropriately impressed by the prospect. That sounds very reasonable, I said. The growth potential is really what I'm interested in. Sarah smiled, clearly pleased with my response. Excellent. Now I do want to be transparent about something. Working in a family business can be challenging. There are expectations about fitting in with the company culture, professional appearance, understanding your role in the organization, being supportive of the team without trying to overstep boundaries. Understanding my role in the organization, not trying to overstep boundaries. The subtext was clear. Stay in your lane, don't get ideas above your station. Remember that you're here as a favor to Marcus rather than because of your own qualifications. I completely understand, I replied. I know this would be a big adjustment for me, and I'd want to learn the proper way to do things. Perfect attitude, Sarah said, making a note on her legal pad. Now, Marcus mentioned that you've been thinking about making some changes in your personal style as well. Upgrading your wardrobe, that sort of thing? My personal style. The implication being that my current appearance wasn't suitable for representing the Thompson family business, even in an entry-level administrative role. I've been thinking about that, I admitted. I know my current clothes are more appropriate for retail work than office environments. Well, there are definitely expectations when you're representing Thompson Auto Group, Sarah explained. Our customers are successful people who expect to see professionalism at every level. That means quality clothing, appropriate accessories, understanding how to present yourself as part of a winning team. Quality clothing and appropriate accessories, purchased on a $32,000 annual salary that would barely cover the rent increase I'd just given Patricia Thompson. Would the company provide any assistance with that transition? I asked, playing the role of someone who genuinely needed help affording professional clothes. Sarah looked slightly surprised by the question. Well, we don't have a formal clothing allowance, but I'm sure Marcus could help you get started. And there are always sales at the better department stores. Sales at the better department stores. Advice for improving my appearance on a budget, offered by someone who probably spent more on handbags than my proposed annual salary. I think I can manage, I said. I'm just excited about the opportunity to learn and grow. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering topics like company policies, vacation time, 1 week after a full year of employment, and the importance of maintaining confidentiality about customer information and family business matters. One last thing, Sarah said as we wrapped up. I hope you understand that this position would require your full commitment. No outside business interests, no conflicting priorities. When you're part of the Thompson team, we need to know that we have your complete focus. No outside business interests, no conflicting priorities. They wanted me to abandon my real estate portfolio, my supervisory role at Morrison's, and my actual career to answer their phones for $32,000 a year. Of course, I said. I understand completely. Sarah stood up, extending her hand with the satisfied expression of someone who just solved a family problem. Emma, I think this could be a perfect fit. Let me discuss the details with Dad and get back to you by Monday with a formal offer. Thank you so much, I replied, shaking her hand with genuine enthusiasm, though not for the reasons she imagined. I really appreciate this opportunity. Marcus was waiting in the showroom when I emerged from the conference room, his face eager with anticipation. How did it go? He asked immediately. Really well, I said. Sarah seems to think it could be a good fit. Marcus grinned, pulling me into a hug that attracted the attention of several nearby salespeople. This is going to be amazing, Em. You'll finally be part of something bigger. Something with real potential. Part of something bigger. As opposed to the property investment business I'd built that generated more monthly income than his entire annual salary. I'm excited about the possibility, I said truthfully. William Thompson approached from his office, his expression carrying the benevolent satisfaction of a patriarch solving family problems through generous employment opportunities. "Emma," he said warmly, "Sarah tells me the interview went very well. I have to say, I'm pleased that you're considering making this transition. It shows real maturity and understanding of what it takes to build something lasting." Real maturity. Understanding of what it takes to build something lasting. Offered by someone whose business was heavily leveraged and dependent on financing agreements, to someone who owned commercial real estate worth over $8 million. "I really appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Thompson," I said. "It means a lot that the family would consider including me." "Well, you're part of the family now," William replied magnanimously, "and family takes care of family. We want to see you succeed, Emma. We want to help you reach your potential. Help me reach my potential." The phrase echoed in my mind as I drove home, thinking about the morning's conversation with Patricia and the afternoon's job interview. 2 interactions with the same family, separated by just a few hours, that revealed everything about how they viewed success, worth, and the appropriate role of women in their social hierarchy. Patricia Thompson had learned that her assumptions about my financial status were not just wrong, but spectacularly wrong. She was now facing the possibility of paying significantly more rent to continue living in a building owned by the woman she'd spent years dismissing as a grocery store cashier. But the rest of the family still had no idea. They were moving forward with plans to rescue me from my dead-end retail job, offering me entry-level employment that would require me to abandon my actual career and pretend gratitude for the opportunity to answer their phones. The Thompson family education was progressing beautifully, but it was far from complete. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Emma, this is Patricia. We need to talk. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? I'll pay for coffee, please." I smiled, recognizing the panic in her abbreviated message. Patricia Thompson, who had never in her life paid for my coffee, was now offering to buy my silence about her family's true financial situation relative to mine. Tomorrow would bring another interesting conversation, but tonight I had some planning to do. Because while Patricia now understood exactly who she was dealing with, the rest of the Thompson family was about to receive their own education, and I was very much looking forward to being their teacher. Saturday morning found me sitting in Café Luna, a trendy coffee shop in downtown that charged $8 for specialty lattes, and attracted the kind of clientele that Patricia Thompson usually felt comfortable around. I'd arrived 15 minutes early, curious to see how my mother-in-law would handle what was undoubtedly the most uncomfortable conversation of her life. Patricia appeared at exactly 9 a.m., looking like someone who hadn't slept well. Her usual immaculate appearance showed subtle signs of stress, makeup that couldn't quite hide the dark circles under her eyes, an expensive outfit that seemed chosen more for armor than style. She scanned the cafe until she spotted me, then approached my table with the careful steps of someone walking through a minefield. "Emma," she said, sitting down across from me with the kind of forced smile people wear when they're trying to pretend everything is normal. "Thank you for meeting me." I gestured to the menu. "Please, order whatever you'd like. You mentioned you were buying." Patricia's smile flickered slightly at the reminder of her offer to pay, something that would have been unthinkable just 48 hours ago, when she still believed I was financially dependent on her son. After ordering what appeared to be the most expensive item on the menu, Patricia settled back in her chair and attempted to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she began carefully, "and I realized there may have been some misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. The word hung between us like a diplomatic euphemism for years of deliberate condescension and dismissal. "What kind of misunderstandings?" I asked, genuinely curious about how she planned to reframe 2 years of treating me like an embarrassment to the family. "Well," Patricia said, clearly choosing her words with extreme care, "I think perhaps we didn't fully understand your situation, your business background." "My business background. Yesterday I'd been a grocery store cashier who couldn't afford decent clothes. Today I had a business background that required delicate handling." "Cool." "I see," I said neutrally. "And what about my situation do you think you understand now?" Patricia leaned forward slightly, lowering her voice as if we were discussing state secrets. "Emma, I want you to know that I had no idea about your real estate investments. If I had known, obviously our conversations would have been very different. Obviously. Because in Patricia's worldview, the only thing that mattered about a person was their net worth and the respect it commanded from others. Different how? I pressed. Well, we would have treated you as the successful businesswoman you clearly are. We would have asked your advice about investments, included you in our business discussions, recognized your expertise, recognized my expertise. The same expertise she'd dismissed as little projects just days earlier, suddenly worthy of respect now that she understood the dollar amounts involved. That's interesting, I said, taking a sip of my coffee. Because I'm the same person I was last weekend when you called me a grocery store cashier who couldn't afford decent clothes. My expertise hasn't changed, just your awareness of it. Patricia's cheeks reddened slightly. I know how that must have sounded, but you have to understand we didn't know. You never mentioned your real estate business. You drive a modest car. You work at Morrison's. I work at Morrison's because I enjoy the work and I'm good at it, I interrupted. Not because I need the money. I drive a reliable car because I prefer to invest in appreciating assets rather than depreciating ones. And I didn't mention my real estate business because no one in your family ever asked me anything about my background beyond my job title. The truth of that statement settled over Patricia like cold water. In 2 years of family gatherings, birthday dinners, and holiday celebrations, not one member of the Thompson family had ever asked me about my education, my previous work experience, my goals, or my interests, beyond what they could observe about my employment and appearance. You're right, Patricia admitted quietly. We should have asked. We should have gotten to know you better. Should have. Past tense, as if their failure to see me as a complete person was simply an oversight that could be corrected with better manners going forward. Patricia, I said, using her first name deliberately. The problem isn't that you didn't ask about my business. The problem is that you assumed someone who works in customer service must be less intelligent, less ambitious, and less worthy of respect than someone who sells cars or handles marketing for a family business. Patricia shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I don't think that's fair. We never said anything about intelligence or worth. You said Marcus had settled for me. You laughed when Jake called me just a cashier. You suggested I needed to upgrade my wardrobe and career to be appropriate for your family. How is that not making judgments about my worth? The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Patricia stared into her latte as if it might contain answers to questions she'd never thought to ask herself. What do you want from me? She asked finally, her voice small and defeated. It was a fair question, and one I'd been considering since yesterday's revelation. What did I want from Patricia Thompson and her family? I want respect, I said simply. The same respect you'd show any successful businesswoman. I want you to stop making assumptions about people based on their job titles or their shopping habits. And I want you to understand that your behavior has consequences. Consequences? I pulled out my phone and showed her the lease renewal documents I'd prepared that morning. Your new rent will be $3,400 per month starting next month, plus the $500 administrative fee for difficult tenants. Jake and Jessica's rent is increasing to $2,600. Uncle Robert and Aunt Helen will pay $3,500 for their corner unit. Patricia stared at the numbers with growing horror. Emma, you can't do this to family. Can't I? I asked. Because yesterday you made it very clear that I wasn't really family. I was just Marcus's poor choice in wives. Someone who needed to be managed and improved and possibly replaced with someone more suitable. I didn't mean it like that, Patricia protested desperately. How did you mean it? The question hung in the air unanswered because we both knew exactly how she'd meant it. Look, Patricia said, her voice taking on a pleading quality I'd never heard from her before. I understand you're upset, and you have every right to be. But these rent increases, they're going to put a real strain on everyone. A real strain. I thought about Jake's casual mockery of my employment, Uncle Robert's dismissive comments about my appearance, The collective laughter when Patricia had suggested Marcus had settled for someone beneath his social class. Patricia, your family spent years assuming I was financially struggling while you lived in apartments I owned and paid for with money I earned from investments you didn't even know existed. You mocked my job while benefiting from my business success. A little financial strain might help you develop some empathy for people you perceive as being in difficult circumstances. Patricia's composure finally cracked completely. Emma, please. I know we handled things badly, but you have to understand we're not wealthy people. The auto dealership business is feast or famine. Some months are good, some months are tight. These rent increases, they could force Robert and Helen to move. Jake and Jessica are already struggling with their car payments. The admission was revealing in multiple ways. First, it confirmed what I'd already discovered through my research. The Thompson family's financial situation was far more precarious than their lifestyle suggested. Second, it showed that Patricia was finally beginning to understand the power dynamic that had actually existed all along. Maybe they should have thought about that before they decided to mock someone's employment situation, I said calmly. What if we apologize? Patricia asked desperately. What if the whole family apologizes, acknowledges that we were wrong about you, treats you with the respect you deserve? That would be a start, I agreed. But apologies are just words, Patricia. I'm more interested in seeing changes in behavior. What kind of changes? I leaned back in my chair, considering how to articulate what I wanted from the Thompson family going forward. Okay. Stop judging people by their job titles or their appearance. Stop assuming that someone who works in customer service is less intelligent or capable than someone who works in sales. Stop talking about people as if their primary value is how well they reflect on your family's social status. Patricia nodded eagerly. Yes, absolutely, we can do that. And, I continued, I want the family to understand that the job interview yesterday was insulting. Offering me $32,000 a year to abandon my actual career and answer your phones isn't generous, it's condescending. But we didn't know about your real estate business, Patricia protested. You didn't know, but you also didn't ask. You assumed that someone who worked at Morrison's must be desperate for any opportunity to improve their situation, even if that improvement meant taking a significant pay cut to do less interesting work. The truth of that statement was clearly uncomfortable for Patricia, but she couldn't deny it. So what happens now? She asked. That depends entirely on your family, I replied. You have some choices to make. You can continue paying market-rate rent and treating me with respect, or you can find somewhere else to live and continue your assumptions about people who work in customer service. And Marcus? Patricia asked quietly. Are you going to tell him about all of this? It was the question I'd been expecting, and the one that revealed exactly how little Patricia understood about the situation she was in. Patricia, this isn't about keeping secrets from Marcus. This is about whether your family is capable of treating people with basic respect, regardless of their perceived social status. Marcus is going to learn the truth about my financial situation eventually. The question is whether he learns it in the context of his family finally growing up, or whether he learns it during a very public conflict that damages everyone involved. Patricia's face went pale as she processed the implications. You're saying you might tell everyone? Publicly? I'm saying that secrets have a way of coming out, especially when they involve this much money and this many people. Your family has been living in apartments owned by someone you've spent years treating as a charity case. That's a story that's going to be told eventually. The only question is how it gets told and by whom. The coffee shop conversation continued for another 30 minutes, with Patricia alternating between apologies, justifications, and desperate attempts to negotiate a solution that would allow her family to maintain their dignity while acknowledging my actual status. But dignity based on deception and condescension isn't really dignity at all, and I wasn't particularly interested in protecting the Thompson family's comfort at the expense of my own self-respect. By the time we parted ways, Patricia understood that the old dynamics were gone forever. The grocery store cashier who absorbed their mockery with quiet resignation had been replaced by a property owner who held significant power over their housing situation and wasn't inclined to subsidize people who treated her badly. But the real test would come tomorrow, when the family gathered for their regular Sunday dinner at William and Patricia's house. Because while Patricia now understood the truth about my situation, The rest of the family was still operating under their old assumptions, and I was very much looking forward to their education continuing. Sunday dinner at the Thompson house was a weekly tradition that had felt like an obligation for 2 years. But this Sunday, I arrived with a spring in my step and a leather portfolio tucked under my arm, ready to complete the education I'd been providing to Marcus's family all week. Patricia opened the door wearing a strained smile and the kind of nervous energy that comes from harboring explosive secrets. She'd clearly spent the past 24 hours wondering whether I would expose everything at dinner or continue playing along with their assumptions about my career and financial status. "Emma," she said with forced enthusiasm, "you look lovely. How was your week?" "Eventful," I replied with a meaningful smile. "Very eventful indeed." The family was already gathered in the living room. William reading his newspaper, Jake and Jessica discussing their upcoming vacation plans, Uncle Robert and Aunt Helen debating the merits of different investment strategies. Marcus stood when I entered, pulling me into a hug that smelled like the expensive cologne his family had bought him for Christmas. "How's my future business professional?" he asked proudly. "Sarah said the interview went incredibly well. Dad's planning to make you an official offer tomorrow." "I'm looking forward to hearing it," I said truthfully. William Thompson looked up from his newspaper with the satisfied expression of a patriarch who'd solved another family problem. "Emma, I have to say, I'm impressed with your willingness to make this career transition. It shows real maturity." Real maturity. I smiled and took my usual seat at the edge of the group, noting how Patricia watched me with barely concealed anxiety. "Speaking of careers," I said casually, "I had some interesting developments at Morrison's this week too." Jake looked up from his conversation about vacation plans. "Oh right, the grocery store. What could possibly be interesting about that?" His tone carried the same dismissive amusement it always had, but Patricia flinched visibly at his words. "Well," I said, opening my portfolio, "I was offered a promotion to district supervisor. 4 stores, $78,000 starting salary plus performance bonuses." The room fell silent as everyone processed this information. $78,000 was more than Jake made at the dealership, more than Marcus earned in most years, and significantly more than the entry-level position they were offering me. That's quite a lot for grocery store work," William said carefully. "It is," I agreed. Morrison's Market is actually a $3 billion company that takes customer service and operations management very seriously. The district supervisor position involves overseeing 180 employees and approximately $12 million in annual revenue. More silence. The Thompson family was beginning to realize that their assumptions about the grocery industry, and my role in it, might have been somewhat oversimplified. "But surely," Sarah said, "you'd still prefer to work with family? In a real business environment?" "That depends," I replied, "on how you define, quote, real business environment." I pulled out the first document from my portfolio, a corporate organizational chart showing Morrison's Market's management structure. "This is where I fit in the company hierarchy," I explained, pointing to the district supervisor position. "I'd be reporting directly to the regional manager, overseeing 4 store managers, and responsible for customer satisfaction metrics across a territory that generates more revenue than most standalone businesses." The family stared at the chart like it was written in a foreign language. Their understanding of retail work apparently didn't include concepts like territorial management, revenue oversight, or corporate advancement tracks. "Emma," Marcus said slowly, "I had no idea Morrison's was so complex." "Most people don't," I agreed. Just like most people don't realize that customer service skills translate directly to business management, or that retail operations involve inventory control, staff management, financial analysis, and strategic planning. I pulled out the next document, my performance reviews from the past 2 years, showing consistent ratings of exceeds expectations in leadership, problem-solving, and business development. "But," Uncle Robert interjected, clearly struggling to maintain his worldview, "it's still just retail work. It's not like building something lasting, like a family business." "You're absolutely right," I said with a smile. "Building something lasting is much more important than working for someone else's company." I reached into my portfolio again, this time pulling out property deeds, business registration documents, and bank statements. Which is why I've spent the past few years building my own real estate investment business. The silence that followed was so complete that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway. Every eye in the room was fixed on the documents I'd spread across the coffee table. "Real estate?" Marcus asked weakly. "Commercial and residential property investment," I confirmed. "I currently own 7 rental properties throughout the city, including the Riverside Heights apartment complex where Patricia, Jake, and Uncle Robert live." If I'd announced that I was secretly an alien from Mars, the family couldn't have looked more shocked. Jake's mouth fell open. Jessica grabbed his arm as if she needed physical support. Uncle Robert's face went completely white. "That's impossible," William said flatly. "You work at a grocery store." "I work at Morrison's because I enjoy it, and I'm good at it," I replied calmly. "I own real estate because I understand investment principles, and I've been building my portfolio since college." Marcus was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "Emma, what are you saying exactly?" "I'm saying that your family has been paying me approximately $8,400 per month in rent, while simultaneously mocking my financial situation and career choices." The explosion of voices that followed was immediate and chaotic, Jake demanding to know if this was some kind of joke, Jessica asking if I was serious about owning their apartment, Uncle Robert sputtering about lease agreements and rental terms, William insisting that this had to be a misunderstanding. But Marcus just sat there in stunned silence, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in his mind. "The duplex," he said quietly. "Our duplex. You've never complained about the rent." "Because you've been paying it to me," I confirmed. "I own our duplex, Marcus. I've owned it since before we met." The room fell silent again, as the family absorbed the full magnitude of what I was telling them. "So when you offered me that administrative position," I continued, addressing Sarah directly, "you were essentially asking me to abandon a business that generates more monthly income than your entire dealership's profit margin, to answer phones for $32,000 a year." Sarah's face had gone pale. But you said you were interested." "I was interested in seeing how you'd treat someone you perceived as being in need of your help," I replied. "And the answer is, not very well." I stood up, gathering my documents back into the portfolio. This week has been educational for everyone involved. Patricia learned that assumptions about people's financial status can be expensive when those people turn out to be your landlord. Sarah learned that offering someone a significant pay cut isn't necessarily generous, even if you call it a career opportunity. And all of you learned that judging people by their job titles or their shopping habits can lead to some very embarrassing misunderstandings. Marcus found his voice. "Emma, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you tell any of us?" "Because," I said, looking around the room at their shocked faces, "I wanted to see how you'd treat someone you thought was beneath your social class. And the answer is, very poorly." "But we're family," Patricia protested weakly. "Are we?" I asked. "Because at last week's family reunion, you made it very clear that I was an embarrassment to the Thompson name. Someone Marcus had settled for. Someone who needed to be managed and improved, and possibly replaced." The shame on their faces was obvious now, but it was 2 years too late. "What happens now?" William asked quietly. "Now," I said, "you pay market rate rent like any other tenants. You treat people with respect regardless of their job titles. And you remember that success comes in many forms, some of them more visible than others." I headed toward the door, then paused to address Marcus one final time. "The district supervisor position at Morrison's comes with relocation opportunities throughout the region. I'm thinking of accepting a transfer to Denver. Better investment opportunities and a fresh start sounds appealing." Marcus jumped to his feet. "Emma, wait. We can fix this. We can apologize, make things right." "You can apologize to the next person you meet who works in customer service," I replied. "As for making things right between us, that's going to take more than words, Marcus. That's going to take you figuring out whether you married me or the person you thought I should become." I left the Thompson family sitting in their living room, surrounded by the evidence of their spectacular misjudgment, finally understanding that the woman they'd dismissed as just a grocery store cashier was actually the most financially successful person in the room. 6 months later, I accepted the Denver transfer and bought a beautiful mountain property with the profit from selling the Riverside Heights apartment complex. Patricia Thompson still sends me Christmas cards from her new, much smaller apartment across town. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people discover that their assumptions about you were completely wrong. And sometimes the best education is the kind that comes with a bill attached. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.